If you're living alone after 70, or you're about to be, there are 5 things that are going to happen to you. Not might happen, will happen, whether you like it or not. And number 4 is the one nobody ever talks about, because it's the one you can't see while it's happening to you. My name is Walter. I'm 82 years old, and I've lived alone in this house in Maine since I lost my wife, Helen, 7 years ago. Maybe you're new to it. Maybe the house went quiet a few months ago and you're still waiting to feel like yourself again. Or maybe it's been years now, and you've quietly stopped expecting to. Either way, I know what's coming because all 5 of these came for me, and nobody sat me down and warned me about a single one of them. So let's start with the first one right now, and stay with me through number 4. That's the one that nearly got me, and it's the one I most want you to hear, because it's the only one of the 5 that does its damage while you're looking straight at it. The first thing that happens is that the silence gets into you. Not the silence in the house, the silence in you. Because when there's another person under your roof, you talk all day without noticing. It's cold in here. The kettle's on. That dog is back in the yard. Small nothings. Helen and I did that for 54 years, and I couldn't tell you one word of it. When she was gone, that whole layer stopped immediately. And after enough months of never putting a thought into a sentence, something starts closing up in a man. Here's how I found out. Second winter. Susan called on a Thursday the way she does, and I said hello, and I heard my own voice, and it startled me. Rusty is the closest word. I sat there with the phone in my hand and worked out that I had not spoken one word out loud since the Sunday before. 4 days. Not to a person, not to myself, not to the radio. And I hadn't noticed it happening. So I started talking out loud in an empty house. To Helen, and I'm not confused. I know she isn't there. But also just to the room. That's a hard frost. The bread's about done. It sounds like a man losing his grip. It's the opposite. A voice that goes unused becomes a stranger to its owner, and a mind that never has to form a sentence starts letting go of the sentences. Use your voice every day, even if nobody will ever know you did. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe to this channel so you don't have to walk it alone. All right. Number 2, the second thing that happens is that people stop inviting you. I want to be careful here because this one makes people angry, and the anger is understandable, and it's aimed in the wrong direction most of the time. Nobody decides to stop inviting you. There's no meeting. What happens is quieter and more mechanical than that, and understanding the mechanism is the only thing that makes it bearable. For most of your adult life, if you were part of a pair, you got invited as a pair. Couples invite couples. Nobody says it out loud because it doesn't need saying. A dinner has 4 people, or 6. They arrive 2 at a time, the table is balanced, and everybody knows how it goes. When you're suddenly one, you don't fit that shape anymore. And people are not cruel about it, they're awkward about it. They don't know whether you'd want to come. They don't know whether it would be painful for you. They don't want to be the ones who invite a widower to a table full of married people and then watch them sit there. So they hesitate. And the hesitation, repeated over a few months, becomes a habit, and the habit becomes the arrangement. And nobody ever decided anything at all. There were people we saw twice a year, Helen and I, the Prescotts, Ray and Marjorie over in Hampton. 20 years of that. They had us in the spring, and we had them in the fall. After Helen died, they had me once, that first spring. Marjorie was kind about it, and I went, and it was fine. And it was also plainly difficult for everybody, including me, because I was one person in a chair that had always held 2, and the whole evening had a hole in it that we all politely walked around. They never called again. 20 years of a friendship ended without one word being said about it. I don't hold it against them, and never have. They're decent people. That evening was hard, and they didn't know how to fix it, and neither did I, and the easiest thing in the world was for nobody to try again. But here's the part I had to admit, and it took me 3 years. Some of the thinning out was mine. Elaine down the road tried for the better part of a year before I ever said yes to a cup of coffee. The church sent people. A man named George called on a Wednesday evening when I very nearly didn't pick up. And every time I declined, I taught somebody something. That Walter isn't really available. Not deliberately, but people learn from what you do, and what I did for 18 months was reliably signal that I'd rather be left alone. So they left me alone, which is what I'd asked for, in every way except words. By the time I wanted the invitations back, I'd spent a year and a half training people not to extend them. So the whole thing has to reverse. You have to become the one who invites. That was the hardest adjustment I made in 7 years. Harder than the cooking, harder than the nights, because a man of my generation does not invite people. Helen did that. For 54 years, the invitations went out under her name and in her handwriting, and I showed up in a clean shirt. I called the Prescotts myself about 2 years ago. Took me a month to work up to it. Had them at this table, and it was awkward for 20 minutes, and then it wasn't, and we've done it twice since. And it's mine now. My invitation, my table, my doing. And I'll say the practical part, because I think people here be the one who invites and imagine something they haven't got in them. It is much smaller than you're picturing. It is not a dinner party. It's a pot of soup and 2 bowls and a Tuesday. It's asking somebody to come look at a thing in your yard and having the coffee on when they do. Nobody in their 80s is expecting entertainment. They're expecting a chair and an hour and somebody who's glad they came. Nobody's going to come and get you. I'm sorry to be blunt. The world is not going to notice you've gone quiet and come knocking. You do the knocking and it feels undignified at first, and you do it anyway because the alternative is a very quiet 20 years. Before the next one, tell me in the comments what you miss most. Not the big thing, the small one, the one nobody else would think of. I read every single one, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. And if this is helping you, that thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to somebody else sitting alone tonight. Number 3, the third thing that happens is that time loses its shape. This one surprised me completely, and I've since found out it surprises almost everybody, and it is one of the strangest experiences of living alone. When you're working, the week has a shape built into it from outside. Monday is not Saturday. You know what day it is without having to think about it, because the days are structurally different. Different demands, different places you have to be, different clothes on the hook by the door. Now take away the job, take away the wife, who had her own rhythms that shaped the week whether you noticed or not. Church on Sunday, the shopping on Thursday, the long call to her sister. Take away the children, grown and gone 30 years. What's left is 7 identical days, and what happens then works in 2 directions at once. The individual hours get longer. An afternoon in an empty house can go on a remarkably long time, but the weeks and months get shorter. They collapse. You look up and it's March, and you've very little idea what became of January and February, because nothing distinguished any of those days from any of the others, and so your mind, quite reasonably, didn't bother storing them separately. That's the thing about a shapeless stretch of time that nobody warns you about. It doesn't only feel bad while you're inside it, it disappears afterward. A year of undifferentiated days is a year that is simply gone out of your life, leaving almost nothing behind. I have 2 years like that. I could not give you a decent account of either one. Here's the morning I understood it. Somewhere in that second year I got up, did the ordinary things, got in the truck and drove into town for breakfast at the diner. 20 minutes each way, and I pulled into the lot and it was empty and the lights were off, and I sat there genuinely confused for a moment before I understood that it was Sunday, and that the diner has never once been open on a Sunday in the 40 years I've been going there. I had it checked afterward. I want to say that plainly because I know what it sounds like, and I know what people my age are afraid of. It wasn't that. What had actually happened was simpler, and in some ways, worse. The information had stopped being worth keeping. Nothing about my Sunday differed from my Wednesday, so some part of me had quietly stopped tracking which was which, because it had no use for the answer. So I put markers in. Deliberately. Small things that make one day different from another, so the week has a skeleton again. Sunday has music in the morning and a proper dinner in the afternoon. Thursday is Susan's call. Saturday morning is the diner, which I now manage to attend on the correct day. First Monday of the month I do the accounts. In the fall, Tuesday afternoon is when I split wood. None of those matter individually, and it took me a while to understand that that isn't the point. The point is that together they give the week a shape, so a Wednesday feels like a Wednesday, and time has some texture instead of running together into one gray stretch that vanishes the moment it's over. And there's a second layer to this that I've only understood in the last year or two, which is about the seasons rather than the weeks. Up here, the year has a very strong shape to it, whether you participate or not. There's the wood in the fall, there's the deep of the winter, there's mud season, which is its own miserable thing. There's the lupines coming up in June in the bed Helen planted, and the light going gold on the cedars in October, and the first hard frost, and the last of the tomatoes. For 2 years, all of that went past me. It was happening. The year kept doing what the year does. But I wasn't in it, and I wasn't marking any of it. And a man who doesn't mark the seasons in a place like this has given up the largest free structure available to him. Now I put my hand in it. The wood gets split in September and October, which makes those 2 months different from all the others. There's a day in June when the lupines are at their best, and I go out and look at them properly, and I write it down. The first snow that stays gets noted. The first morning I have to break the ice in the bird bath. The day I bring the last of the garden in. And I'll tell you the odd thing about markers, which is that they work even when you know perfectly well you invented them. Sunday dinner does not become a real institution because God ordained it. It's real because I decided it was and then did it 80 times running. That's all any of this is. A man alone can simply declare that Tuesday afternoon is for splitting wood and then split wood on Tuesday afternoons. And within a season, Tuesday has a character it did not have before. The arbitrariness doesn't weaken it. I was suspicious of that for a long while. It felt like playing pretend, like a grown man giving himself a schedule so he'd have somewhere to be. It is exactly that. And it works anyway, which is the part that matters. There's a third thing, which is that the markers have to be small enough that you'll actually keep them on a bad week. That's where I went wrong on my first attempt. I gave myself an ambitious schedule sometime in that second year, a proper program, several things every day, and I kept it for about 11 days, and then February did what February does, and the whole structure came down at once. And a structure that collapses is worse than no structure, because now you've also failed at something. So make them small, absurdly small if you have to. Sunday has music on in the morning. That's the marker. Not a service, not a dinner, not anything requiring resolve. Music on. A man can do that on his worst day, and because he can do it on his worst day, he does it every week for 4 years, and it becomes real. The other thing I'd say is to put at least one marker outside this house. That was a mistake I made early. All my first markers were interior. The coffee at a certain hour, the shop at a certain hour, the fire in the evening. Every one of them could be done without ever opening the door. And a week full of markers that all happen indoors is still a week in which a man never goes anywhere. Saturday morning at the diner is worth 3 interior markers because it requires the truck and a clean shirt and 20 minutes of road and the company of people who are not me. If the months are disappearing on you, and you'll know if they are, that's the fix. 4 or 5 markers in the week, at least one of them out of the house, and half a dozen across the year. It's a small piece of work, and it gives you your time back. We're getting close to number 4 now, the one I said nobody talks about. The fourth thing that happens is that your standards slip, and you cannot see it happening. That's the whole of it. And the second half is what makes it dangerous. Every standard you have ever kept, how you eat, how you dress, how you keep the house, how often you shave, whether the bed gets made, every one of those was being kept, at least partly, in front of somebody. You didn't experience it that way. You'd have said you had standards because you had standards. because that's how you were raised, because a man keeps himself decent. But there was a witness. For 54 years, there was a woman in this house who saw me every single day. I never once thought of Helen as a witness. That's a cold word for what she was. But that is one of the functions a person in your house performs. And you find out it was a function when it stops. Take the witness away and something starts to erode. Not through any decision. Nobody decides to let themselves go. It happens one entirely reasonable small choice at a time. You don't shave because you aren't going anywhere. That's not laziness. That's sensible. You wear the same shirt tomorrow because it's clean enough and nobody will see it. Also sensible. You don't cook a proper supper because cooking for one is a great deal of trouble for very little return. Sensible again. Every one of those is defensible in isolation. And they accumulate. And the accumulation is invisible from the inside because you were present for every step, and each step was small, and there is no mirror in a life that shows you the distance between where you started and where you have arrived. Here's mine. It was the third winter. A letter came from Lily, my granddaughter we've written back and forth for years now, and I sat down at this kitchen table that evening with paper and a pen to write back to her, which is a thing I take seriously and give a whole afternoon to. And as I set my hand down on the paper, I saw my own cuff. I won't describe it in much detail. It was the cuff of a flannel shirt that I had been wearing. I worked out afterward for something like 11 days. And the state of it was such that I sat there looking at my own wrist and could not account for how it had gotten that way without me noticing. I hadn't decided anything. I had simply, over 3 winters, stopped being looked at, and something in me had quietly let go of a standard I'd kept without any effort at all for 80 years. I got up from that table and went upstairs and put on a clean shirt and came back down and wrote the letter. And I have thought about that cuff more often in the years since than almost anything else that has happened to me in this house. Now, I can hear the objection because I made it myself. Silently, on about 9 of those 11 days. It's a shirt. It's a shave. Who cares? There's nobody to see it. It doesn't hurt anybody. And an old man is entitled to be comfortable in his own house. Here's why that isn't right. The standards were never about appearances. What they actually are is a daily physical statement about whether you're worth the trouble. Every time you shave, some part of you registers. This man is worth 10 minutes. Every time you put a proper supper on a properly set table for one person, something registers, this man is worth cooking for. And every time you don't, every meal eaten standing at the counter, every day in the same shirt, that registers too in exactly the same ledger, saying exactly the opposite thing. You are talking to yourself all day long in a language that has nothing to do with words. And what I was saying to myself that third winter, without ever once forming the thought, was not worth it, not worth the shirt, not worth the supper, not worth the 10 minutes. That is not vanity. That is the foundation. And when it goes, it does not stay in the bathroom and the laundry. It spreads. The man who isn't worth a clean shirt is soon enough the man who isn't worth cooking for, and then the man who isn't worth the trouble of a phone call to his own son, because every one of those is the same judgment applied to a new area. So, what do you do about a decline you can't see? 2 things, and they're both mechanical, because you cannot fix this with willpower. Willpower requires noticing, and noticing is precisely the thing that is not available to you. The first is that you put the standards on a schedule instead of on a judgment. I don't decide whether to shave, I shave. Every morning, the same as when I had a job to go to. I don't assess whether the shirt is clean enough. The shirt goes in the wash after 2 days, regardless of what I happen to think about it. I don't ask myself whether I feel like cooking a proper supper. There is a supper on that table at 6. The decision has been taken away from me on purpose, because my judgment in these particular matters has already been demonstrated to be unreliable. And I know it. The second is that you get yourself a witness. Not a spouse. You're most likely not getting another one of those, and I'm not going to sit here and tell an 80-year-old to go find somebody. A witness is a different thing. It is anyone who sees you regularly and often enough to notice a change. It might be a daughter who calls every Thursday and has been trained by 30 years of nursing to read a person in 90 seconds. It might be a neighbor down the road who comes for coffee and would say something if she saw something. It might be a room of 40 people at a church on a Sunday morning who have known your name for decades. Get seen by somebody regularly. That is the whole prescription. Because the instrument you would use to check on yourself, your own mind, your own judgment about how you're doing, is precisely the instrument that fails in this particular way. And the only reliable correction is another set of eyes. There's one more thing I'd add, and it's for the people who have somebody trying to be their witness and are pushing them off. Because I did that. Susan was doing the job faithfully from 200 miles away for 18 months, and I lied to her every single Thursday. Not big lies. I said I was fine. I said I'd been eating. I said I'd seen people that week. And I meant no harm by any of it. I thought I was sparing her. And I thought a father is not supposed to be a burden on his daughter. And I thought that managing my own difficulties in private was simply what a man does. What I was actually doing was disabling the one working instrument in my life. She could not see what I would not show her. And the whole time I was congratulating myself on not worrying my children, the thing they most needed in order to help me was an honest answer to a simple question, and I would not give it. So if somebody asks how you're doing, a daughter, a neighbor, a man at the church, and the true answer is not good, say not good. That's the entire skill. You don't have to explain it or ask them for anything. Just don't hand them the other answer out of habit. The performance of being fine is the most expensive habit I have ever had. I don't believe I was in danger of anything dramatic that third winter. I want to be honest about that rather than making it sound worse than it was. But I was on a slope, and the slope had a direction, and I only found out I was on it because a letter came from a 19-year-old girl, and I happened to look at my own wrist. That's number 4. That's the one that got me and very nearly kept me. And it's the reason I wanted you to stay through to it. The 5th thing that happens is that everything becomes your decision and nobody warns you what that weighs. This is the last one, and it took me longest to name because on the face of it, it sounds like a good thing. Freedom. You eat when you want and sleep when you want and paint the kitchen any color you like, and nobody gets a vote. People who've been married a long time joke about that, and the joke isn't entirely a joke. And it is good some of the time. There are real pleasures in it. I eat supper at whatever hour suits me. I've arranged this house to suit one man, and it does suit me. Nobody has an opinion about how long I stay up. But that's only half of it, and the other half is a great deal heavier than anybody tells you. For 54 years, every decision of any size in my life had a second person in it. Not because Helen had to approve, that isn't how we operated, but because I would say the thing out loud to her, and she would say something back, and in that exchange, the decision got tested. She'd see the part I hadn't seen. She'd ask the question that made me realize I hadn't actually thought it through. And half the time she'd say nothing much at all, and the mere act of putting it into words for another human being would show me what I actually thought. I never once in 54 years thought of that as something she was doing for me. I'd have called it a courtesy, or a habit, or just what married people do. It was none of those. It was a piece of equipment. And I found out it was equipment the way you find out anything is equipment. It stopped working, and everything downstream of it started going wrong. Here's the night I understood the weight of it. The furnace went in the January of that first year. Not the wood stove, the furnace, which I need as backup at my age, and which is not an optional item in Maine, in January. I went down to the cellar with a flashlight and looked at it and understood roughly what I was dealing with, and then I just stood there. Because there was a real decision to make about repairing against replacing, actual money either way, and I had turned around to say something about it, and there was nobody on the stairs. I stood in that cellar about 20 minutes, not thinking about furnaces, thinking about the fact that this was now what every decision was going to be like for whatever was left of my life. I made the call eventually, had it replaced, which was right, but the difficulty was never the furnace. What I do about it now, and this is the only thing I've found that genuinely helps, is that I have stopped trying to decide alone simply because I live alone. Those are two different things, and I had them confused for years. I called David and talked through anything of any size, not because I need my son's permission, but because saying it out loud still does what it always did. It tests it. He rarely tells me what to do, and I rarely want him to. The value was never the advice. The value is that the decision passes through a second mind on its way to being made. I ask Susan about anything to do with the body because she's a nurse and because I have learned the hard way that my own assessment of my own condition is the least reliable assessment available in this house. And on the smaller things, the ones not worth a phone call, I say them out loud in the kitchen anyway. Which brings us back around to the first thing I told you tonight. The voice, the empty house, the man talking to a room. Same practice, different job. Say the thing out loud and it gets tested, even when the only ears in the house are your own. There's one more piece of this that I'd want anybody living alone to hear, and it's about the decisions that are still out in front of me. I'm 82. There are things ahead that I have not decided yet, and that will be considerably harder than a furnace. Whether I stay in this house, when I stop driving, what happens if something goes wrong with me in a way that can't be managed from here? Every one of those is going to arrive, and every one of them would have had two people in it once. What I've decided, and this took some doing because it runs against everything a man of my formation was built to do, is that I am not going to face those alone just to prove that I can. I've talked to David about the house, not because it's urgent and not because I'm handing him the decision, but because I would rather have that conversation 4 times over 5 calm years than have it once in a hospital corridor with everybody frightened. That's the thing about the weight of deciding alone. You can't get rid of it. The decisions are yours and they will stay yours. But you can decide in advance that you are going to carry them within reach of other people rather than off by yourself where nobody can help. And do that talking early. Earlier than feels necessary. There's a temptation to wait because none of it is urgent, and raising it seems like inviting trouble into a perfectly good year. But a conversation you have at 82 over a cup of coffee, with nothing pressing and nobody upset, is an entirely different thing from the one you have 4 years later in a corridor with your children frightened and a doctor waiting. Same subject. In one of them, you're a man deciding his own affairs. In the other, you're a situation being handled. I'd rather be the first. So I've started talking years before I need to about things I'd much rather not think about at all. And there's a smaller version of this weight that I think catches people off guard, because it isn't the big decisions at all. It's the volume of small ones. When there were 2 of us, the small decisions were divided without either of us ever discussing the division. She handled certain things, and I handled others, and neither of us could have told you how the line got drawn. Now every one of them is mine. What's for supper? Whether that noise in the truck matters, when the sheets get changed, whether to take the beach down this year or give it one more, whether that ache is worth a doctor. There are perhaps 40 of those in a day, and each one is trivial. And 40 trivial decisions a day made entirely alone add up to a kind of tiredness that has no name and that you cannot explain to anybody without sounding ridiculous. The fix for that one isn't other people. It's routine. Every decision you convert into a standing arrangement is a decision you no longer have to make. Supper at 6. The shirt goes in after 2 days. The shop at 9. Sunday is the roast. I've made this house as automatic as I can stand. And not because I'm rigid, because the automatic parts don't cost me anything. And at 82, I have a limited quantity of deciding in me on a given day. And I'd rather spend it on the beech tree than on what's for supper. Independence and isolation are not the same thing. I ran those two together for about 75 years. The first one is worth defending right to the end. The second one nearly finished me. That's all 5. Now I want to say the honest part, and then I'll let you go. None of these are avoidable. That's why I put it the way I did at the start. Whether you like it or not, you cannot arrange your life so the silence doesn't get into you, or so people go on inviting you the way they did, or so the days keep their shape on their own. Those things are going to arrive. They arrived for me, and I had no idea any of them were coming. And I lost the better part of 2 years to them before I understood what I was even looking at. What you can do is know they're coming, and know what they look like, and have something ready. That's the whole of what I've got. Talk out loud, do the inviting yourself, put markers in the week, keep your standards on a schedule and get yourself a witness, and run your decisions past another person even though you don't have to anymore. And I'd say one thing about the order of it, because I got the order wrong and it cost me time. I tried to fix the feelings first. That was the mistake. For about 2 years, I was waiting to feel better, and I understood the feeling better as the thing that would eventually let me start living properly again. So I waited. I waited to feel like inviting somebody. I waited to feel like cooking a real supper. I waited to feel like a man who shaves. The feelings do not come first. That is the single most useful thing I learned in 7 years. And I'd carve it into the door frame if I thought it would help anybody. You do the thing while you still feel wrong. You invite the Prescotts while it still feels absurd to be inviting anybody. You shave on a morning when you cannot think of one reason to. You put the supper on the table for one person while some part of you is saying, "This is ridiculous. There's nobody here." And you do it again the next day and the next, and somewhere in there, months in, not days, the feeling quietly arrives and takes up residence behind the behavior that has been sitting there waiting for it the whole time. Behavior first, feeling second, every time. I have never once seen it work the other way round. Not in my own life and not in any of the men I watched go through this before me. I'm not going to tell you it makes it the same. It doesn't. There's a life I had, and this isn't it, and it never will be. I'd have her back tomorrow and give up every single thing I've learned in 7 years for it. And I want to be honest about that, because I think a good deal of what gets said about this pretends otherwise. There's a version of these talks that would tell you the loss made you wiser, and the solitude was a gift, and everything happens for a reason. I'm not going to say any of that to you. It didn't make me wiser. It made me older faster. It wasn't a gift. And if there's a reason, nobody has told me what it is in 7 years of sitting in this chair. What I'll say instead is smaller, and I believe it completely. You can build something on the other side of it, not a replacement. There isn't one, and there won't be. Something else that has its own worth that you would never have chosen, and that turns out to be worth having anyway. It's quiet here, and it's mine, and there's work in the shop in the morning and a fire in the evening, and people who know my name. I had a friend named Frank. Lost his wife about 4 years before I lost Helen. Same town, same age, near enough, same trade. And Frank got every one of these 5 things exactly the way I did. And he didn't know they were coming either. And nobody ever told him what he was looking at. He went quiet. He stopped answering. The invitations thinned and he let them. And the days ran together and he let them. And there was nobody close enough by the end to notice what was happening in that house. He died at 76. I was on Frank's road. I want to be plain about that because I don't want any of this to sound like a man congratulating himself. The difference between us was not character. Frank was in several respects a better man than I am. The difference was that some people kept knocking on my door long after I'd stopped opening it, and eventually I opened it. And by then I'd worked out enough of what was happening to me to do something about it. That's all this is tonight. Somebody knocking. I'm 82 years old, alone in this house. And I'm all right. You will be too. It takes longer than anybody tells you, and it doesn't come by waiting. But it comes. So that's the 5. The silence. The invitations. The shape of the days. The standards nobody's watching. And the weight of deciding alone. Sit with them a while. And if one of them landed harder than the others, if you got to one and thought, that's me, that's the one I'm in right now, that's the one to start on this week. Not all five, one now. If tonight happens to be one of the hard nights, one of the ones where 3 in the morning arrives and settles in and will not leave, I made another talk about exactly that, about what that hour actually is and what I do when it comes for me, and why almost nothing you conclude about your life at 3 in the morning turns out to be true at 10 the next day. It's right there on the screen. Go on over when you're ready. The fire's still going here and the kettle's still warm, and I'll be talking a while yet. I'll see you there.